Well, speaking of the salary cap and Saracens, we can speak to a man that's more at the heart of it than us. Brendan Venter joins us. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks.
Brendan, great to have you on, mate. We were unsure whether you were going to come on. I know there's been a Twitter spat, which is almost unbelievable from probably where you come from in recent years with the wisdom, but that's the way that life is. I've got one big question that I need to ask first before we get into it.
Yes.
My turnover in 2016 against Exeter in the Premiership final, does that still stand or not? Does that still stand?
Tim, you do realise you are a legend at the club. So, I mean, whatever you did, it just gets bigger and bigger. So it will stand, yeah.
Thanks very much. Look, we need to get into it because I think naturally you've been very vocal about the whole situation around this before, obviously more so now. You're big on pushing out that the culture at Saracens is still there, and that's been the driving force behind the situation and the championships and everything that I was involved in as well. I think the other argument to that, which, as we know, Goode has been very vocal about, is that the culture is stemmed from the success, which is stemmed from, which we know now, Saracens breaking the salary cap. Just give us an overview, and again, there's stuff in the media, we've heard you, we've seen it on Twitter, but an overview now. You've had a couple of days to digest it. You've calmed down from the abuse that Goody's given you on social media.
Oh, careful about using that word,
I
mate.
know. It's
Shame,
slander.
yeah. I've been mean to Goody as well, so no worries there.
That's okay.
Jim, look, I quite like to debate or argue or call whatever you want factually, because so much of what we do and say is emotional and what I call anecdotal. So there aren't facts. It's like a case study of one. The nice thing with Saracens is we've actually got a brilliant case study of environments because Nigel has been involved for 25 years. So you could argue for the first 15, Nigel had loads of money. Nigel spent a lot of the money on the club and absolutely nothing came from it. So I'll give you a good example. In 2002, 2003, Saracens team, which when they recruited Goody, they had a brilliant team. Cristiano Califano, they had Richard Hill, Abdul Benazi, they had Kieran Bracken, they had Goody, they had Tim Horan, which I think I played against him, must have been the best 12 in the world ever. They had Thomas Castagnier. There was a superstar team for that period. And they came 8th. I mean, they recruited amazing coaches. Eddie Jones was at the club, was a really good coach, and literally nothing happened. And then this current group of coaches joined in, I think, 2009 and put this run together. So there's actually no debate that it cannot be the money because the money was there for 15 years. So what is it that is different? It's this group of players and these coaches that grew this environment together. And a lot of people came in and went out. You take a guy like John Smith, who is very, very, very experienced in cultures and playing in different places. And John came and was amazed at the way Saracens did things. And you came and you left. There's nobody that comes and goes and says, this is a horrible place. And that was actually my debate with Goody. I was saying, you are actually just wrong about it. The success of Saracens really wasn't the money. The fact that we could keep everybody together, there I agree with Goody. That is why we ended up being amazing for 10 years. Because all the studies tell us, when I started the project 10 years ago, we looked at a lot of different stuff. And we mainly looked at Leicester and Wasps because they were the two successful places. And we say, how can we do what they did? And we said Wasps had a brilliant defensive system. And we said, if we don't have a great defense, we won't be successful. I said, Leicester, we looked at Leicester. They had an amazing pack. You went to Leicester, you struggled. Their pack was strong. But then we looked at both teams and we said, the irony is there were more than 15 players that had played more than 100 games for the club. And that became our goal. How do we keep these people together? And you are right. When the success came, Nigel kept stepping in. So first these academy kids were 30 grand. Then they were 70 grand. Then they were 100. Then they were 150. And then they became British Lions. And they were 450 or 400 or whatever they are on. And that is where Nigel's money bailed us out, that we could sustain the success over such a long period. So it's a combination of stuff. But without a doubt, It was first culture, first environment, first success, and then money in this case.
I understand what you're saying there, Brendan, but you've accused me of saying that the results of winning everything is money. But I haven't questioned the culture at all. What I've said is culture is so much easier when players are paid way more than they'd get at any other club, which becomes a cycle of winning and having an amazing squad. Take John Schmidt, who you mentioned, a good friend of mine. Played with him at the Sharks, looked after me very well, lovely bloke. And I played in a great environment and a great culture with him at the Sharks. But you talk about Jamie George now, who has come through the academy. He's learnt off the best hooker in the world at the time in John Schmidt. He's also learnt off of
Sculler,
probably the second best hooker at the time in Scout Brits. And now he's an English international British line and probably one of the best hookers in the world at the minute. So other clubs haven't been able to have that luxury of having two world stars for their academy guy to learn off and supposedly still being in the salary cap. Now, I understand the culture. I understand the culture. And I understand what you're saying. Your values as a club, your cultural values, you talk about honesty, discipline, work rate and humility. I don't see any honesty in what's gone on in terms of paying players.
It's a valid point you've got. But you must remember, our problem wasn't there from the start of the 10 years. So we were easily within that. So what you're arguing now is we spent the money in the olden days, and that's why Jamie and them could benefit from it. But we weren't. John and Sculler wasn't the problem. That's not where the money was spent. The money was spent when the youngsters became superstars. That's when we broke the cap.
Brendan, you've broken it for the last 6 years.
Who told you that?
Well, so let's go. You've broken it this year. You can't get under the salary cap this year. You've been found.
You do know why? You've
been found guilty for 3 years. The last 3 years. So that's the last 4 seasons, and then 2 seasons prior.
Not 6 though. In fair, that.
Well, no. Because if you hear me out, the 2 years prior to that were the 2 years that you got found guilty, and it was undisclosed and kept under wraps. Now, you can say that we weren't caught and we weren't the club as much as you want, but everyone knows that Saracens were the club that paid an undisclosed fine for breaking the salary cap back then. So that's the last 6. That's the last 6 seasons.
That with you because factually, I have no knowledge of any of that. So I have only knowledge of the last 3 years and this year doesn't really count, Goody.
Well, of course
you
it does.
Understand why?
Of course it does, because you're over the salary.
So why would you say it doesn't count? But what would be the logic behind it?
I'm saying it does count because you're over the salary cap this season.
But the logic behind it was that they debated and they had a legal case that they were under that whatever they did was fine. They lost the case. It was impossible to then be under the cap because when you lost the case and they tell you that in November, the season is 2 months on, Goody. That's just logic. You can't actually debate that with me.
No, I can debate that the fact that you've broken it for the last 3 years and then you look at the squad this year. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that this year you're going to be broken it.
6.
Well, no, I'm 6 from 6, to be honest. We can differ on opinions. That's fine.
You see, your argument is still not a good argument because Jamie was at the club as a 20-year-old. What you're trying to say is that we've always overpaid. I just explained to you at length that Saracens overpaid for 15 years. In your time, they overpaid as well. But there was no culture. There was no academy kids that came through. There was nothing like that, Goody. So what would your argument to that be?
I'm not disputing the culture's good there, Brendan.
Answer that question.
What I'm saying is the
first 15.
The first 15 years.
Why did that same argument you've just now applied, why did it not work in the first 15 years? Why did nobody come through? Why did nobody learn from Tim Horan? Why did nobody learn from Thomas Castanier?
Well, they're probably errors of judgment in terms of the coaches that were in charge and the players that he signed, whether you've overpaid them or not.
So that's a valid point. In other words, something else changed 10 years ago.
I'm not disputing the coach, Brendan. I'm not disputing the coaches or the culture. All I'm saying is you live by your values, and honesty is one of them, and you've broken the salary cap, and that's all I've said. And culture is easier when you're paying players a lot more, and everyone's happy. They're getting well looked after off the field. Their families are well looked after, and that's what Saracens. And I've always said, Brendan, I've always said every player in the Premiership would love to go and play for Saracens for those reasons. Have I not said that on the podcast?
No, you have, yeah.
And I would have loved to have been involved in an environment like that, where you paid what you think is fair. Because sometimes as a player you don't get that at other clubs. Your family's well looked after. You go on the trips. You got a band of brothers there that are all pulling in the same direction because they're very happy.
Brendan, I just want to ask a question as well. I think that this is what a guy that's been on the inside, and it's been a tough few weeks for everyone. I think it's been a tough few weeks for everyone now with what's happened with the relegation, and I mean that with rugby fans, even people that are goading other clubs, it is a little bit of a mess. But when the big question is the books haven't been opened, so there was a decision for the books to be open or take relegation. So I say Saracens have taken the relegation off the side of that. I think one of the things for me is I can deal with the administration and the co-investments and Nigel going into properties with the guys and the expense of London properties.
Agree.
But the thing that it seems from my point of view, which I'm gutted about, that it seems bigger than that. Am I right in thinking that or not? Because I think that this is what the masses are now, is because I don't think Premiership Rugby will tell us what's happened. I don't think they will give us the facts, and I know that you're probably not going to give us all the facts, but is it bigger
I don't
than
have
what we
all
think?
those facts. No, so I don't have all those facts, but I'll give you the facts that I have, and that it is actually the amounts involved is actually much smaller than the 2 million thrown around. It's genuine. So I asked them about 8 weeks ago, what are we over? When the thing broke, I was like, oh, this is not ideal. How much are we over? And like the next week, how much? So nobody could tell me. So that was the first thing. Nobody knew.
Is that from Saracens? Nobody knew, or from Premiership Rugby?
Yes, from Saracens. No. Premiership Rugby said they're not going to disclose it. These are the fines. My first question was like Jim's question, but how bad is it? And nobody could tell us. And then I kind of realized that actually nobody knew. And this is why my argument yesterday on the other podcast with Ugo and them was, I know you guys, a lot of people think Nigel is a devil incarnate and, he's this unbelievable, dishonest person. It's the absolute opposite. Nigel's kindness is what led to this whole problem. And there wasn't even a proper book kept about what was happening, because every time that a player needed to be kept, the player would go to Nigel personally, and Nigel would broker a deal with him. And Nigel would always broker a deal around the joint investments thing. So to answer your first question, Jim, how bad is the other stuff? Edward gave us, for me, he sent me, because Edward's a friend of mine, and I said, tell me what the whole extent. Edward went into the whole thing, 100%. And when Edward sent me the numbers, I was actually pleasantly surprised. I said, is this all? So I said, because we almost got within the salary cap this year, legally, with the 3 injuries we had this year.
I hear very differently, but I understand your point of view.
Brendan.
No, but I'll tell you, this is factually. So the reason they backed out of the thing and accepted the relegation is because then certain players would have to leave the club now. And that would have been wrong.
So you think that they've done what they've done, Brendan, to protect the values of the club because they didn't want to dismiss people now?
Well, that is exactly what happened. We had 2 choices. We could go and cut now, and people have to be sacrificed, and even the players would have to offer the players to take a pay cut. So there was a worked out plan to be able to do that. And the thought process was, but that's not what we are about. We're just not going to do it like that. And then let's accept relegation.
So, Brendan, just going back to the here and now, you mentioned what other people have been saying about Nigel Wray. I think, in fairness to Goode and Jim, they've both paid tribute to what a genuine nice bloke he is, and the charity work he does, and everything else. And I can only echo that from my experiences as well. But do you accept that he's made mistakes? And,
absolutely.
And also,
absolutely.
is your point that Premiership Rugby have made more mistakes?
No, not really. Look, I believe the salary cap is a good thing. That's the irony, because rules are there that we have to abide by them. And that's the way the world works. The world works with rules. So contrary to popular belief, I don't actually think it's a bad thing. And the playing field has to be equal. Otherwise, you'll get Man City and Chelsea and Man U just running away with the thing, and there's 4 teams competing and 16 others not. So that's the irony. There were little things that I couldn't understand when I looked from the outside. The one was there was a perception that Nigel was a cheat and dishonest. And honestly, that's not that. He made mistakes, but a lot of those mistakes were made with the understanding that legally, the legal fees were something like £3 million in the thing. So somebody had to give you that advice that these things are legit. That's the first thing.
You want to ask for your money back.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And I think that for me was the thing. And then the thing that I couldn't understand is if you tell people 6 weeks into a season that you now are guilty. Remember, all the planning up to then was done with the idea that you've won the case. Your lawyers have told you, then they say you're guilty. Okay, there you go. Okay, that's a problem. And now I want you to rectify this year as well. And I go, but remember, our planning was done with the idea that we're not guilty. So to then ask, and this is why I stepped in and I looked at the thing and I said, these two things are not fair. That's why I'm so outspoken about the thing. And it's hard to debate to say, no, of course that's fair. And I'm going, but how does that work? How do you fix a problem in the middle of a season and say to 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 players, we were very lucky because there were a couple of players, high-profile, expensive players that got injured. So we could actually get close. But in reality, we shouldn't have even been close. And then that's where I stepped in and why I've been so outspoken. And that's almost the end of the frustration now because what's done is done. And Saracens are regulated. Now we need to go forward.
I agree with that. I think the one bugbear for a lot of people will be, though, when it boils down to the fact that you did have a choice of opening your books or taking relegation, with the values that you live by, why can't Saracens have just said, well, here you go, this is what's happened, and put it all out there? Instead, it still looks like, you want to keep everything under wraps because you've been found guilty, and you're more happy to take relegation than just pure honesty and openness.
To be brutally honest with you, the reason they didn't do the appeal is because legally the appeal would never, it's not a factual appeal. The appeal is whether the PRL have got the rights to make a decision like this, which they have. So if you're part of the PRL, they've got that right. So that's why it would work. And it's the same point, Goody. There was always going to be relegation. That's what was needed because when they could see Saracens, the 35 points was not going to do the thing, whilst Leicester and London Irish are just adamant. They can't afford to get relegated, and it's going to be. And I think Saracens, and I don't have so much inside info. A lot of what I do is from the outside. I've got friends which I ask in the club, but I'm not right in the inner circle making the decisions. But they realized the only thing that was going to satisfy this is relegation because we need to move forward now. There needs to be clarity. We can't struggle like that. We need to prepare a squad for the championship. We need to keep the squad together and we need to move forward and we need to come back into the Premiership with a very strong squad. Within the cap, whiter than white, following every rule 100%. That's the vision of the club.
Brendan, just before Jim asks you a question, I think there's one key point there on the transparency. Obviously, Saracens aren't going to open their books and you've explained sort of why they won't do that. But as a league, and as a product, Premiership Rugby, this is quite embarrassing. Do you think they need to come out and publish that report or give us more information so that the credibility of the league can be re-established?
Look, I must admit, 3 months ago, that is exactly what I would ask for. At the moment, I'm not even thinking about what happened, what should happen. I'm thinking what's done is done. Now it is what it is. Next job. How can Saracens get back to where they were? And if you imagine, life is so short. A year is a year is nothing in one's life. So my thought process is not at all anymore blaming and picking and saying what PRL should have done or what Tony Rose should. I think my thing is, can we get our team together and be competitive again? Imagine the sports story of being relegated and coming back and being competitive again. How amazing that will be.
Yeah, it'd be great. And one of the questions then, you're talking about keeping the squad together. So there's obviously a lot of mixed noises. You're saying that a lot of the squad are going to be kept together. Mark McCall said that the squad is going to be broken up. Can you talk about which, who's right, who's wrong here? What's going to happen?
Mark would not have meant it like that at all. Mark is the main guy architect of keeping our squad together. And Mark's got a brilliant plan. We will definitely keep our squad together. Definitely. There'll be people who are retiring, but we've got some amazing young players coming through who we will make sure stay. And I know Smalley will make sure that our senior players stay. I'm completely convinced that we will keep our squad together. 100%. You must have, in it that way, misunderstood Mark.
That's fine. Brendan, cheers for coming on. I know it's been a shit week, a week that's probably had to happen in hindsight and looking at it now. I wouldn't say, friends, clear the air, Goody, happy? Good on him for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Brendan. Appreciate it. We're obviously going to disagree on a lot of things, and you can only hope that now there is a line in the sand and there's clarity of what's going to happen, that Saracens do, as you say, stick to the salary cap and a white to the white moving forward.
Okay, Goody. Okay, Jim, it's nice to talk to you.
Thanks, Brendan. Thanks for coming on, mate.
Okay.